Shalom and welcome to the Israel Policy Pod. I'm Neri Zilber, a journalist based in Tel Aviv and a policy advisor to Israel Policy Forum. Walla News chief political correspondent and friend of the pod, Tal Shalev, is back with us to discuss Netanyahu-Trump round 3, which happened this week in Washington. It's the third time Prime Minister Netanyahu met with President Trump in less than 6 months since Trump's inauguration in January, more than any other world leader, which seems significant. Tal and I discussed exactly just how significant, or not, this meeting was in our conversation, especially coming after the 12-day war with Iran and just ahead of what many people hope will be a new Gaza ceasefire for hostage deal. We also discussed what Bibi may be thinking now in the wake of his rather successful campaign against Iran, and we'll also get into the current state of play in Israeli politics, both in the coalition and, God help us, in the opposition as well. Just a reminder, we're also now a video podcast available on YouTube, so you can see us and not just hear us. But we're also, of course, still audio only, as always, wherever you get your podcasts. Do subscribe and leave a nice rating and comment if the mood strikes you. All right, housekeeping over, let's get to Tal Shalev. Hi, Tal. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Neri. Thank you for having me again.
It's really our pleasure. To remind you, Tal, last time you were on was in April, just ahead of Pesach, Passover, and just after the second Trump-Netanyahu summit in Washington. So I wanted to have you on now for round 3 to break it all down for us. I think it's fair to say that back in April, the consensus was that it wasn't a very successful trip for Bibi Netanyahu to go meet with Trump. Trump back then announced direct talks with Iran. Seems a bit funny now. He also pressured Netanyahu on things like Turkey and Syria, etc. But we're now after a war with Iran and possibly just ahead of a Gaza ceasefire. So I guess the first question to you, Tal, and the question on everyone's mind here and in many other places, what did you make of the two meetings between the two leaders? Yesterday on Tuesday and then the night before, Monday for dinner. What do you think in terms of the messaging, the optics, or lack thereof?
I think it's too early to call. I've been saying basically let's be patient. I mean, I know everyone is very, these meetings yesterday and even the meeting before, they're not exactly the traditional protocol meetings we're used to seeing between presidents and prime ministers, even between Netanyahu and Trump. You have the traditional protocol in which they have the Oval and they might have, a press conference later. But here, everything is in a much more familiar-like, even family-like manner. I mean, the first meeting was dinner with Sarah and Yair Netanyahu there. And it was extremely unusual. And the second,
I was going to say unusual is to put it mildly. They were sitting around a dinner table. They let in only the American journalists, and so they're asking questions to both leaders. Netanyahu has his back to the journalists, so he's turning around, talking to the journalists, talking to Trump. I mean, it's not traditional by any stretch of the imagination.
So, and the meeting yesterday was without any press at all. So, right. It's definitely an interesting visit, right? Like all Netanyahu visits to the White House usually are. But if there's one thing that I've learned from all of these visits, even in Trump 1 and this third visit in Trump 2, is that looks can be deceiving. And sometimes there might be a really grand presentation or facade for the optics, but at the end of the day, not much is left of it. Even if we go back to the first meeting between Trump and Netanyahu in this term, in the second term, the February meeting, where Trump basically starts dreaming about a Riviera in Gaza and, prompts dreams here of the right-wing dreams of transferring the Palestinians from Gaza. I don't know. We're 5 months later and nothing has really happened there besides like here in Israel getting a lot of hype about it. But in reality, not much has happened. So one of the things I have learned with these meetings is it's okay to take a pause and say, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't really understand what's going on there. It's clear that something is going on, right? But there are so many scenarios that I can make up into that there's something going on, spanning from Gaza to Iran to Syria to just, Netanyahu giving Trump Nobel nomination for a Nobel Prize and just like being very nice to him. It's clear that Netanyahu, from his political point of view, it could be that this is also a facade, that this is something like this is just a show of showing a lot of pressure from Trump on Netanyahu or whatever.
Right.
It can be so many scenarios. So I think we're just in the middle of the visit, and we might even be seeing another meeting. I carefully dare to predict that there's a high chance that we can find Netanyahu staying there until Sunday or Saturday, just like previous visits to DC, and suddenly a weekend in DC will appear on his itinerary. So basically, I think it's too early to try and give signs to this. And another thing that I've learned is that we are working with, or we are covering, not working with, we're covering and trying to analyze two leaders who thrive on disinformation and misinformation, not only as a political strategy, but as we learned in this whole 12-day war with Iran, also in their geostrategy. So, and geopolitical strategy. So, I think it's very difficult to try and analyze and to separate what is reality what is the alternative reality they're both trying now to create for their supporters, and what exactly is happening in reality and not in the visuals.
So that's a very important point. I think all of us, not just in the business, but all of us looking on at this relationship between the two leaders and the two countries, the U.S. and Israel, need to be a bit more humble after the Iran war. Because, like you said, that was a purposeful campaign of misdirection, misinformation. It was deception to get the Iranians off guard. And it worked because as listeners of this podcast know, I got on a plane to Greece the day before it all started.
I got on a plane to the U.S. the day before it started. So, yeah.
Yeah. So we all have to be a bit more humble. And yes, if in April it seemed like it was an unsuccessful visit, there were tensions. This time, it seems like there's a lot more warmth, a lot of hugging. Trump said, we have a tremendously successful relationship. I mean, there was a lot of warmth there. At one point, I think you probably saw it too, at this weird dinner table press conference, non-press conference. Trump was asked about both the two-state solution and his idea for the Gaza Riviera and kicking out the Gazans, and he just deferred to Bibi. He gave the answer to Bibi, which I don't think I've ever seen.
Yeah. Again, we've been hearing a lot. Also, okay, let's get back to like the real issues on the table besides the atmosphere, which is clear that why there's a warm atmosphere right now, right? They're both after a very successful campaign politically, or at least in its first image, in its first response. It's a successful campaign, and they both want to project like their victory. So that's the atmosphere. Right. But on the table, basically, if we put aside Iran, because there's probably something going on between them that regards Iran, and there's probably something going on regarding Syria, but we look to where people's lives are waiting, to the hostage deal and the war in Gaza. Ending the war in Gaza, then I keep getting a real sense of deja vu to the February meeting, because in the February meeting, it was just after, the January hostage deal, and the White House was briefing that they will want to discuss the terms for ending the war with Netanyahu, and then Netanyahu came up with all these terms. He didn't come up, presented his terms, expelling all the Hamas leadership, and
demilitarization,
total demilitarization. And here we are 5 months later, and the White House is briefing exactly the same thing, and Netanyahu is briefing exactly the same thing.
Exactly.
And
the
we're
same
not
thing.
really moving forward in ending the war in Gaza. And, if we think about that first visit, I remember I was with Netanyahu there. Then we went to Washington expecting President Trump to, knock on the table and tell Netanyahu, you got to end the war in Gaza. That didn't happen. So I don't know.
And no, it didn't happen. And also Trump and his administration let Netanyahu restart the war in March.
Exactly. On the other hand, we still have the impression, and we know the very strong impression, President Trump came back from his visit to the Gulf states, and we know that the Gulf states want the war in Gaza over. So it really, I think, depends on how much President Trump is going to let Netanyahu prolong this war without, because he does have the power and ability to stop the war if he wants to, just the way he did, after 12 days with Iran. He has the capability and the ability to do so.
He does, but it's like you said, deja vu with regard to earlier this year, where the consensus here for weeks was that, Trump will end the war. Trump will force Netanyahu to end the war. That wasn't true back then, and I'm still not convinced it's true now. But
not only that,
this is a good segue.
President Trump and Witkoff and, the whole geopolitical establishment that is dealing with this issue continues to abide by the formula that is designed for Netanyahu's political needs here in Israel, which means that you will have a phased deal instead of one ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, ending the war in exchange for all of the hostages. So we're continuing to split the ceasefire into a never-ending ceasefire and hostage deal so that Netanyahu won't need to end the war. And he's just earlier this week, before he left, as Netanyahu was basically leaving for the U.S., the defense minister, Israel Katz, had a briefing with the military reporters in which he presented Israel's new goal, which is building a humanitarian city near Rafah and moving all the Palestinians there. And it's exactly, and we're hearing so much about, Tzir Morag, the Morag corridor. That is a year ago, that was Philadelphia, and a year and a half ago, that was Rafah. So he just continued to find excuses or, pegs to campaign on them, which are basically conditions that make a ceasefire almost impossible because the Hamas will never accept these terms.
Right. So we also have to be a bit humble. We're recording this, as mentioned, Wednesday afternoon Tel Aviv time. So, the mood music yesterday from Steve Witkoff was, we're hoping for a deal by this weekend. We'll see. I think that's a bit optimistic, but you never know. But my question to you, Tal, are you optimistic that at least this initial 60-day ceasefire, the first stage of a ceasefire, will be attained, that will get to terms between Israel and Hamas and get at least half the hostages back? I mean, at least that, let alone, leaving aside end of war negotiations and hopefully culminations, but at least the initial 60-day ceasefire, do you think that's possible?
I'm not sure that's even possible given Netanyahu's insistence now on the Morag corridor. If he continues to insist on the Morag corridor, I'm not sure it's possible. But I will try. I am still trying to remain optimist, even if it's not necessarily realistic to remain optimist, because I think, we are at a moment at large regarding this deal, regarding the war in Gaza, regarding the Middle East, that, there is an opportunity to design, to rise from the ashes of this war and really design a better environment and a better, regional security system or architecture. And I think that, of all people, probably President Trump is the one who may be able to do it. So I do think that he's the only person who can end the war in Gaza. So it's better to be optimistic than be pessimistic at this moment, even if it's not really compatible with reality. But someone mentioned, by the way, someone mentioned a quote by Shimon Peres. It's not an exact quote, but something about you can be an optimist and you can be a pessimist. In the end, you die. It just determines how much everyone dies. It just determines how much you suffer on the way till you die. So it's better to be optimistic.
It's definitely better to be optimistic, but also realistic. I'm curious, why are you more pessimistic than many other people here and other people that I've spoken to who think that a 60-day ceasefire is attainable? You know, again, they need to negotiate the final details, including about the Morag corridor
it's attainable.
and IDF withdrawals.
It's attainable as President Trump tells Netanyahu, let's get it over with. And we need to, I mean, and probably Hamas also needs to be pushed a bit more. But I can also see a scenario in which these conditions blow it up. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, and this has been true since January 2024. Hamas wants to end the war. Netanyahu doesn't want to end the war. I mean, that's their main demand, and that's his main condition. And since January 2024, you know, because of this architecture and there have been many phased deals that have been designed. But at the end of the day, in order to end the war, you have to have Netanyahu willing to end the war. And with this coalition, he can't do that.
Right. So we'll get into potentially end of war. I mean, that's kind of 2 or 3 steps from now in just a second. Trust me. But let's play the optimists for a second. Let's say that Trump nudges Netanyahu and Hamas towards a deal. They agree on 60 days. Again, the details still need to be firmed up, and they're, I think, more in flux now than they were maybe a few days ago, but hopefully there will be a deal. Do you think if there's a 60-day pause in the war and an IDF withdrawal and all the other things Israel has to give to get at least half the hostages back, that Netanyahu's coalition can survive that step?
Yes.
And by the way, Tal, okay, that's interesting, because you said the same thing back in January when we had you on, and you, back then, you don't remember this, I do. I also went back and checked. You said Smotrich will stay in the coalition.
Yeah.
In January, before the deal, and that wasn't a given, because he, like Smotrich does, issues a lot of threats. Smotrich stayed in the coalition. Ben-Gvir left for 2 months, and then he came back. What do you think will happen now?
So one of the reasons that Netanyahu is so adamant now on the Morag corridor is for Smotrich not to leave the coalition in a 60-day deal. That's one of Smotrich's conditions. But I still think that Netanyahu's coalition can survive a 60-day hiatus in the war and ceasefire, and another partial deal. Because, you know, Smotrich didn't leave the previous time, so why should he leave now? He still doesn't pass the electoral threshold in most of the polls. So he still is the only one in the coalition. No, I mean, he has the least interest in the whole coalition to bring down the government. Ben-Gvir already kind of made a fool out of himself when in the previous deal, when he left and then after 2 months rushed back in, he can't play that trick again. So that's the second reason. And the third reason is just the timing. And this could also be one of the reasons that we're seeing, we might see a delay in the timetable for such a deal. So today we're on the 9th of July. The Knesset dissolves for its summer recess on the 27th of July. But the last week is literally nothing. So basically there are 2 more weeks left for the coalition to survive. And if Netanyahu stalls this deal even a week, then there's no even real practical way to bring down the government. It'll be very, very difficult procedurally, even if there is a big fallout in the coalition. By the way, this applies also to what's happening with the Haredim and the draft crisis, which we'll talk about later. But just the timing is good for Netanyahu. Netanyahu just needs to survive 2 more weeks in this Knesset session. And then he has 3 months of summer recess in which the coalition is not likely to fall. So it just seems like the timetable. So that's why I think Netanyahu is trying, or might be trying, to push the deal as close to the recess as possible, in a way to secure his coalition from falling apart, even from another interim deal.
Right. I think our friends Shira Efron and Michael Koplow on last week's episode got into the whole timetable issue, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it took the negotiators exactly two more weeks to nail down all the details, and then he can go for a 60-day ceasefire with a cleaner and a cleaner mind, cleaner conscience. By the way, the Knesset recess goes on until I think mid-October. After the high holidays, so it's a very, very long break. Also, another thing in terms of just timetable, not a minor point, the courts here in Israel also go on summer break, I think in the next week or two. They come back, I think, for a short period in September, but then obviously the holidays interject. So basically Netanyahu has to make it for another 2 weeks, and he can go on vacation. I mean, he won't, but he could, at least politically. And legally. Okay, so very interesting with regard to the coalition. You don't think they have as much leverage as they pretend? You don't think Ben Gvir and Smotrich are, going to threaten and actually execute toppling the government over this the ceasefire deal, despite the fact, Tal, you know as well as I do, that elections are already in the air, early elections? Do you think that's spin, speculation? Unrealistic?
Well, I think, even there was a kind of speculation or rumor or report after the Iran war was over that Netanyahu was contemplating a speed election. There's no such thing in Israel, a speed election. I mean, by law, it takes 3 months, and it's very difficult to make it shorter. B, as far as I know, Netanyahu is not considering any speedy elections at the moment. It's not as if the Iran attack, the Iran success, totally changed the polls and from his point of view. Right. It had minor impact. It did have some impact, but it was minor, not dramatic enough at the moment for him to feel secure enough to go to an early election. And C, it's already, the timetable for the next election is quite clear without being a prophet. But the Knesset is going to come back from its summer recess in October. And the government needs to pass another budget, the 2026 budget, by the 31st of March to the latest.
Right.
So the assumption is that they will not pass another budget because the budgets include a lot of tax raising and difficult measures that it will not be popular if you're going to elections anyway in October 2026. So to the latest, the government will fall by the 31st of March. And it might be earlier, a bit earlier, but it's not going to fall in October. It's not going to fall. There won't be elections in October. The earliest timetable that you can see elections right now, and again, without being a prophet, seems that January 2026. So the elections will be somewhere between January 2026 to October 2026. We'll have elections. Still, it'll be one of the longest lasting governments this country has had in the past few years, which is interesting enough.
Well, it's interesting because they're the government of October 7th.
Exactly.
And
not only
and even before that,
overhaul. Yeah, they are one of the most, let's say, aggressive governments, to the least, that the countries have. But they share a lot of interests. So their share interests kind of keep them together. And I don't see, there are slight creeps in their shared interests, but not enough yet to bring the government down there.
Right. Well, we'll do a postmortem about this government when elections are called. Believe me, that will be a fun day and a fun episode. Just to finish up this Netanyahu, and it's related to Trump, but it's mostly about Netanyahu. You have a lot of Netanyahu hours, as they say here. You've been covering him for years. You've met with him countless times. What do you think he actually wants right now? Coming out of the Iran war, the 12-day campaign, very successful. Leaving aside the kind of military achievements, but just it's viewed in Israel as very successful. It's Netanyahu, actually achieving his ultimate dream and his life's mission to bomb Iran and its nuclear facilities. And so coming out of it, there's a lot of questions and speculation. Okay, now that he did that, what does he want to do? I don't want to say with the rest of his life, but with the rest of this political term. And there are obviously all kinds of ideas between ending the Gaza war, a deal with Saudi for normalization,
a plea deal. Some people are
a plea deal, retirement. What do you think?
So here is where I admit that I sometimes don't know. Especially since, 2023 and this government was established, because, Netanyahu always had his two big goals, which was Iran and normalization with Saudi Arabia. These are the things that he wrote in his autobiography that he wants to leave as his legacy. And that has basically, been one of the school of thoughts through which we analyze Netanyahu over the past few years. When he established this government in January 2023, after the 2022 elections, he basically, the judicial overhaul and the very right-wing partners that he chose basically are counter-effective to these two goals. For the first 9 months, this government, waged a war inside Israel, attacking the same pilots that brought Netanyahu his victory in Iran, waged this very deep internal war, which only made Israel weaker, which is against, Netanyahu's whole philosophy of peace through strength. So that is where I started to, question, what are Netanyahu's real goals? Because you have Netanyahu, the statesman who has these two goals of Iran and Saudi Arabia. One of them, it seems like it's been a huge success. We don't know how it will go. I mean, it has been a huge success military, but from the point of view of the nuclear program, we still have to wait and see. I mean, The operation was a huge success from Israel's image and, some of the destruction, and we have hit major facilities, and the overall war was very successful. Regarding the specific goal of the nuclear program, I think it's too early for us to call, and history will probably write if this was the true goal. But there's also Netanyahu, the politician, and Netanyahu who is indicted. And Netanyahu, the politician, always wants to survive, and that's the first and most important thing for him. And Netanyahu, who's indicted and is in court, also wants to get out, doesn't want to go to jail. So having all of these three different Netanyahus together makes me question, what does he want? Because on the paper, he wants Saudi Arabia and Iran. But when you take the two other aspects of his personality and leadership, the fact that he will do anything to survive, including building a coalition with the most radical elements in the political arena, and his will to survive his trial, that has changed, it changes his calculus in a way that it's somewhat difficult to predict what he wants or understand what he wants.
Hugely difficult to analyze and predict. Also, he may not have decided either, so that makes it even harder to say with X certainty.
He probably wants everything, and he's just throwing all the balls and see which one of them falls. It's also one of Netanyahu's tactics, right? He plays on a lot of games, and one of the games will turn out his way.
Right. He paints on a very, very wide canvas, to his credit, and then he chooses usually at the. I don't want to say the last minute, but usually after the last minute, which direction he's going to take. But it is curious. You saw it during the Iran war and after the Iran war. It was almost a different Netanyahu. He was out in public, like his Churchill moment, going to impact sites in Bat Yam and Beersheba. He's back giving press conferences. He didn't give press conferences for months.
Yeah, it wasn't a real press conference. It wasn't a real press conference. It was a press conference on video camera, right? It was a Zoom press conference.
Yeah, but he was standing in front of the hospital of Soroka in Beersheba, answering questions from journalists.
Because he wanted to claim his victory. It was his chance to make the rounds that he didn't make after October 7th. He disappeared after October 7th. He wasn't.
Completely.
So because he didn't want the photos of October 7th to serve in his next or in his opponent's next election campaign. But the photos of Iran is exactly what he wants.
But late last week, he did finally go to Neri Oz, the kibbutz down on the Gaza border. That was the worst hit. A quarter of the population, the residents there, were either murdered or taken hostage. So he waited a year and a half, over 600 days, did not go to Neri Oz, did not deign to go to Neri Oz because of those images that he felt so threatened by. And yet, end of last week, he went. Why?
Well, first of all,
because he felt more confident.
Yeah, because he felt more confident, because he is now, rebuilt his image as Mr. Security. And it's important to know Neri Oz today does not look the same way it looked 640 days ago. It's already, in the process of rebuilding itself. I mean, it's not that walking in the paths of Neri Oz, it's still quite a shivering experience, haunting experience, but it's not where over a year and 9 months after the massacre, and this is a community that at the basis of it wants to, revive itself. So that's the Neri Oz he arrived at. And he also arrives at Neri Oz at a moment before he goes to the U.S. to negotiate a hostage deal and to supposedly bring back some of the Neri Oz hostages home. And in that respect, no one in Neri Oz had, the gut to tell him, or not no one, some of them, but most of the people of the hostages families, all they want to make sure is that their son will come home right now. So it was, I think, a much calmer atmosphere than it was. And I gotta say, the fact that he went to Neri Oz after 630 days, I think it was, or when he was there, 634. It doesn't erase the fact that he wasn't there for the 634 days up until that. I mean, it does, start amending. And by the way, he's the first Israeli prime minister ever in Israel's history to ever come to Neri Oz, because it's such a distant and far away kibbutz that no Israeli prime minister ever had a reason to visit Neri Oz.
Is that right? Not any of the Labor prime ministers? No one? Wow. Okay.
So again, I think, it was personally for me, it was the visit to Neri Oz was after the massacre was one of the most defining, moments of this war. And I also was very critical of Netanyahu not going there for so long. So I'm really happy that he went there. But do I think that people will forget in Neri Oz that he wasn't there for all this time? Not sure.
No, I mean, these aren't exactly Likud voters anyway. And like you said, though, they received him very respectfully. I don't want to say warmly, but it was very respectful.
Yeah, well, they're men's, right? They're kibbutznikim. That's one of the things that we learned about these amazing communities and the Gaza envelope is that they really are like people that, you want to grow up and be like them. And they're, so they're just a group of menses. So that's why they were very polite to him.
Yeah. I mean, we've all seen it under the worst conditions and context possible due to October 7th. But it was one thing that came out of October 7th and this war is the reminder that, yes, there are still kibbutzim in Israel. And yes, there are still kibbutznikim in Israel. And it actually is amazing communities and amazing people that still exist in a real way.
And also, that the people living in these communities on the Gaza border are, they're protecting us, and they're, anyway, they are very moving people. They really are. They could have
been your neighbors, Tal, if you had moved down there.
You never know. Maybe they will be one day.
Maybe they will be. I know that's, you had seriously considered
it will happen one day. It'll happen one day.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we've talked about it both on this podcast and privately. It is a beautiful and amazing part of this country that went through a mini Holocaust on that day. Awkward transition, but I'm going to transition anyway. Let's get into the great game, Israeli domestic politics. We'll start with the governing coalition, then we'll switch to the opposition. In terms of the coalition right now, the big issue before the Iran attack was the crisis over drafting the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, into the IDF. And the big crisis as we speak today, after the Iran war, is the crisis over drafting the Haredim into the IDF. And the Haredi parties are back boycotting the coalition and any legislation that the coalition wants to propose. There was even an op-ed this morning. I'm sure you saw it.
Brilliant.
The big Ashkenazi.
It was brilliant. I loved it.
So let me.
I loved it.
So for our listeners and viewers, let me just explain. So in one of the big organs of the Ashkenazi Haredi newspapers, and it's a big thing because obviously they're less online than me and Tal and all of you. So the newspapers still carry a lot of weight, the hard copies. There was an editorial that compared Netanyahu to Churchill, and not in a good way.
Well, it didn't really mention what was brilliant about it, and Netanyahu wasn't even mentioned by his name. It was just like the story of Churchill. And guess who loves Churchill? Who is the biggest admirer of Churchill in Israel? Netanyahu. So it was a clear message to Netanyahu.
And it wasn't that Churchill won World War II and that he was a great leader. It was how this great leader, the magic expired and he wasn't reelected right after the war. And yes, Netanyahu wasn't mentioned by name, but the message definitely came across. Okay, we'll be right back after this brief message.
Israel Policy Forum is a policy organization rooted in the Jewish community. Our mission is to build support for a secure, Jewish, democratic Israel through a viable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, advancing pragmatic U.S. policy towards the conflict, U.S.-Israel relations, and regional diplomacy among policymakers and community leaders. We promote policy measures endorsed by credible security experts, develop analysis and commentary, and convene programs that engage and educate leaders across the political, denominational, and generational spectrums. Our Young Professionals initiative, IPF at Teed, works to elevate the discourse among next-generation leaders by building community and facilitating engaging programs related to Israeli-Palestinian affairs. To learn more about our work, visit us online at israelpolicyforum.org and follow us on social media. If you rely on Israel Policy Forum for credible and nuanced analysis, please make a tax-deductible gift today at ipf.li/supportthepod or at the Support the Show link in the show notes.
So, given this editorial and given the behavior of the Haredi parties in Knesset, are you concerned for Netanyahu and the future stability of this coalition? Or are they flexing their muscles, but really they're not going to leave?
So we went through the timetable, right? We have about 14 days for this coalition that it needs to survive. And it's the Haredi are furious at Netanyahu, at Yuli Edelstein, who is the head of the Defense Committee in the Knesset, who's supposed to be drafting the bill, de facto. And there's definitely a lot of emotions and noise in the air. But just like Ben Gvir, the Haredim already threatened to bring down the government 4 weeks ago, before the attack on Iran. So they can't really use that stick again, right? They also don't really have an interest to bring down the government, as long as it seems like the next government could be established without them. And given the anti-ultra-Orthodox sentiment in Israeli society right now, that is like a real possibility that there will be a government without the ultra-Orthodox parties that will actually legislate a real draft bill, because it's such a hot topic, right now in Israel. And there are people who will make it a hot topic in the next elections as well. So the atmosphere in the Knesset is not as of a real crisis, but like everyone understands that there's not enough time right now, but everyone has to play their game. So the Haredim need to make themselves sound angry and send, hints and stories about Churchill to Netanyahu, so that everyone knows that they're angry and they're threatening Netanyahu. But nothing is really happening. That being said, 2 weeks is a long time. So when Netanyahu gets back from Washington, the fact that he went away in the midst of this crisis, also, if it was a real political crisis, a real political crisis, we know Netanyahu has known to postpone or delay flights. So we're just not in crisis mode. We're just not in crisis mode right now. But there is, it's kind of a deja vu, right? I mean, basically, since this government was established, every few months, the Haredim are angry that Netanyahu hasn't promoted the draft exemption bill yet. And every few months, they have to threaten with something, and nothing happens. At the end, everyone is just like stalling time. One of the things that does disturb the Haredim very much is the fact that you're hearing voices from the IDF preparing to have a wide-scale operation in giving out some of the 54,000
draft notices.
Yeah, draft notices, and there's a push from the Attorney General also to enforce those notices if the Haredim don't come to the army. So that is a big issue. I mean, if we start to see yeshiva boys arrested because they didn't go to the army when they got the draft notice, then that will bring down the coalition immediately. But that hasn't happened yet.
Right, and it remains to be seen how widespread the draft notices will go out, but how widespread the actual enforcement of those draft notices will be. I find it hard to believe that the IDF is going to send military police into Bnei Brak banging on doors and carting off yeshiva boys.
Yeah,
I find it hard to believe.
Yeah, so again, but
they're not going to raid Bnei Brak like it's I don't want to compare it to something else, but I find it very hard to believe. Also, the Israel police under Itamar Ben-Gvir, will they take part in that? I doubt it. So I'll believe it when I see it. But I think they're unhappy with Netanyahu because he did promise them a whole bunch of things, and now 2.5 years into this government, they haven't got anything.
Yeah, but it's their fault, right? I don't know. I mean, tough luck. There's a long list of people who believe Netanyahu's promises and, commitments, and there's a whole graveyard of them, of broken promises by Netanyahu. So if we go back to this historically, this was the core one of the core elements of the coalition agreements that Netanyahu made with the Haredi parties, that he would legislate a bill that would regulate the fact that they don't go to the army. But then came the judicial overhaul, and that was more important for him to promote when the government was established, and so on and so forth. Here we are 2.5 years later.
Here we are.
And each time he told them after the budget, no, after the next budget, after the next budget. So, yeah.
Yeah, and now they're making their voices heard. But in terms of, I say, a graveyard of broken promises, a boulevard of broken dreams, I mean, the experts in this is the opposition. So we have to talk about the opposition.
And Benny Gantz is the expert on it, actually.
Well, we'll get to Benny Gantz in just a second. Benny Gantz is only the latest and greatest of
and I think of the current opposition, Benny Gantz is probably the man who has, accumulated the most broken promises from Netanyahu.
Yeah.
But that's because, again, we chose to believe him to begin with. So.
Yeah. Again, we'll get into Benny Gantz and the whole issue surrounding him in just a second. But I'm old enough, and you're old enough to remember Shaul Mofaz, the head of Kadima, whose political career ended almost overnight when he believed Netanyahu, by the way, over this very issue, drafting the Haredim into the army back in, 2012. Ehud Barak also lost his political support because he went into government with Bibi Netanyahu, and on and on and on it goes. Anyway, we're not here to look back. We're here to look forward. Looking forward. So the first opposition figure I wanted to talk about, Gadi Eisenkot, the former IDF chief of staff, who entered politics and joined Benny Gantz's National Unity Party ahead of the last election, and last week split with Benny Gantz and his National Unity Party, and also Gadi Eisenkot left the Knesset. He resigned, but he is planning on coming back. Just a question of in what formulation, what context. So what do you think of Gadi Eisenkot's move, and what do you think the future holds for Gadi Eisenkot, who is a very popular politician here in Israel, has to be said?
Well, he's a very popular figure. He's one of the most popular figures in Israel. But I wouldn't, Gadi Eisenkot is not yet a politician, even though he has been in politics for 3 years.
It's a very important distinction to make, yes.
I'm not sure he will ever be a politician, and that's perhaps one of the reasons that he's so likable and so popular as a person. But I think we need to start this discussion with Benny Gantz, because it should be mentioned that Gadi Eisenkot is Gantz's 5th partner, leaving him since he entered politics. Benny Gantz entered politics in 2019, late 2018. He had Moshe Ya'alon, not with him anymore.
Yep.
Then he had Yair Lapid, not with him anymore. Then he had Gabi Ashkenazi, not with him anymore, and now he had Gadi Eisenkot left him as well. You left out a few people, but that's no. The number. I'm speaking about the number, like the number 2, the people that
the number 2,
the partners. These were partners. He built a partnership with Lapid, Gabi Ashkenazi, and Moshe Ya'alon, and he built a partnership with Gidon Sa'ar and Gadi Eisenkot, and both of these partnerships collapsed. And this is a man whose main campaign is that he is a person of agreements and partnerships, but he can't even, if we look at his record, he has no ability of maintaining partnerships in his own, household and in his own party. So first of all, I think that Gadi Eisenkot's leaving Benny Gantz is crucial, or it might be, the final block in seeing what is happening with Benny Gantz. He has had his ups and downs, but Gadi Eisenkot was Benny Gantz's main political asset in the previous campaign, in the previous elections, and it'll be very difficult for him to reinvent himself right now. We can get back to him later. Now, about Eisenkot, he basically needs to decide what he wants to do. basically, the he can go wherever he wants. He has an offer. Well, it's not like on the record, but it's clear that if he wanted, Yair Lapid would offer him the head of his party.
Really?
Yeah, and Lapid has been vague about it, but it's on the table. Lapid is not doing well in the polls. Yair Golan is like going ahead of him inside his own bloc, and he needs to find a way to reinvent himself. And Gadi Eisenkot is a way to reinvent himself. He also has an offer from Naftali Bennett, but not to be number one, to be number two. And you also have Yair Golan from the left and his party calling for some big unification of all of the parties. And he needs to decide where he wants to go. Does he want to be number one? Does he want to be prime minister? Where does he want to take his political career? From his statements, Gadi Eisenkot is a very sincere and authentic person. So you understand that he wants to be part of the leadership that replaces this government and replaces the current leadership. But he's not necessarily keen on being the leader. And if he wants to be the leader, then that's what he needs to decide. And he will need to start, building a bloc or building at least an image or campaigning on that image. He had what was considered somewhat, weak debut. He had a press conference last week. But I think it's a bit different. I kind of defer from most of my colleagues on this. Gadi Eisenkot is not Bibi Netanyahu. He'll never be Bibi Netanyahu. He doesn't know how to speak eloquently like Bibi Netanyahu. He doesn't know how to campaign and do the optics and the visuals and the gestures and the whole show. He doesn't give a show. He's exactly the opposite. He's a totally authentic person. So even trying to judge him by Netanyahu's standards is just wrong. And one of the things here in Israel is that, we've gotten used so much to Netanyahu's leadership style that everything is compared to him. And everyone is like, everyone needs to be a mini Bibi. But I think that perhaps Gadi Eisenkot's authenticity and, the fact that Israelis believe him and they like him could be a really significant asset if and when he decides how he wants to take his career from here on.
Okay, so that's Gadi Eisenkot, TBD. But he doesn't have to be Bibi Netanyahu, but I think he does have to be an effective communicator and some kind of politician.
Yeah, so
to do the job.
Listen, I don't think he's not a politician at all. I mean, he does, he understands. He just, up until now, he was Benny Gantz's number two, so he didn't need to play, the moves. Now he needs to start playing the moves, and he needs to decide, I think, if he wants to play the moves and what moves he wants to play, and he needs to, start building himself. There's also kind of this, he is in the danger of getting weared off with time. So he needs to find a way to remain, he left the Knesset, you mentioned, so he needs to find a way to remain relevant, even if he's not the Knesset. So he has a lot of decisions that he needs to make if he wants to become part of the leadership. But, the main decision is, what is the vision that he wants to present as his vision? Is it a Naftali Bennett vision? Is it closer to Naftali Bennett? Is it closer to Yair Lapid? I think that if he will join Yair Lapid, it will change the way it could change the way the map looks. We're also in that stage ahead of the election in which everyone is polling 25 different scenarios, each poll. What happens if Gadi Eisenkot is number two and Avigdor Lieberman is number three? And no. It's a very exhausting stage in the election. It'll take a few months. It also depends, I think, on what constellation Gadi Eisenkot will believe he is the most significant in? I mean, in what constellation he can become most significant and, contribute to bringing down Netanyahu and replacing the government?
Okay. So our second figure, already mentioned, Benny Gantz. We touched on him a little bit, but why has Benny Gantz found it so difficult to get along with his political partners? And also, what does the future hold for him at the peak, right, of his popularity? Probably the first year of the actual Gaza war after October 7th, he was leading in all the polls, high 30s, sometimes close to 40. Now he's at 4 seats, in danger, like Betzalel Smotrich, of not even making it into the next Knesset due to the electoral threshold. So what happened to Benny Gantz?
So first of all, it actually covering Netanyahu, I always talk about covering Netanyahu, but covering Benny Gantz, when you take a glimpse from afar, it's been quite a roller coaster, right? Because for 3 election campaigns, he was the main contender to replace Netanyahu. He was even, substitute prime minister in their first government. And then from being the most promising politician in the center left, after he joined Netanyahu, he sinked down and almost didn't pass the electoral threshold. And then he made himself, he brought in Gadi Eisenkot and Gideon Saar, and suddenly he was a medium-sized party again. And then in the midst of the war, right in the beginning of the war, he was the most popular politician again. And suddenly again, it was he's the next prime minister. And here we are a year and 9 months later. And he, again, after Eisenkot leaving, he once again is close to the electoral threshold in the polls.
Right.
And there have been speculations that, it hasn't been actually only speculations. Aryeh Deri, Netanyahu's partner in the coalition, the leader of Shas, even was trying to convince Netanyahu to bring Benny Gantz back into the government right now for the 3rd time in order to, secure a hostage deal without Ben-Gvir and Smotrich rattling the coalition. But Netanyahu didn't even want to hear about it. Gantz is now, basically when Eisenkot left, he launched a new campaign, which once again, he's talking about a wide agreement government a wide consensus government, a consensus government of 70 people in the next government. And this is probably going to be his campaign all the way. But Benny Gantz will always have now the question mark, will he go with Bibi after he does it twice? And in a election ecosystem and a political ecosystem in which, at the end of the day, the main question in every election is yes or no Bibi, that might become very unpopular. And, his brand is already so weakened. I mean, the brand is just, he's also not relevant. So, Gantz as well will have to make decisions where he's going. Someone in the anti-Netanyahu blog said I don't understand why we continue to count him as part of our bloc, because I can definitely see a situation in which after the next election, he joins the government with Netanyahu. And Gantz's campaign, as opposed to probably most of the other parties in that bloc, is going to be that he's not going to disqualify Netanyahu, because there's no point at disqualifying Netanyahu after you sat with him twice in the past 5 years. There are, Gantz is going to be, I think, if he does, I don't know how he can, reinvent himself after, being so battered from from so many directions. And if he doesn't reinvent himself, if he can't reinvent himself, he will reach a situation in which he might, he could turn into the next Merav Michaeli, because he'll be very close to the electoral threshold, and then people will be pressuring him to either join another party or drop out of the race because of the risk of losing those votes if he doesn't pass the electoral threshold.
Yeah. For our listeners, Merav Michaeli, obviously the former head of the Labor Party, who ahead of the November 22 election, refused to join forces with Meretz. She said both would pass the electoral threshold. Meretz did not pass the electoral threshold, and it's cost, I don't know if it cost the anti-Netanyahu bloc the election, but it could have been a very different result if Merav Michaeli had
We
been
know
involved.
exactly that they wouldn't have won the election. I mean, Netanyahu still would have won, but he would have a 61 coalition and not a 64 coalition. And a 61 seat coalition is a coalition you can, it's much easier to bring down a 61 seat coalition than a 64 seat coalition.
Right. The final figure in the opposition I want to talk about, Tal, Ayman Odeh. So Ayman Odeh, he's the head of the Hadash faction in the Knesset, which is predominantly Arab-Israeli and most definitely communist. It's usually, part of the Arab bloc in the Knesset. There's a move underway to actually impeach him and kick him out of the Knesset after a tweet he wrote in January expressing happiness that both Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners were being released as part of the then ceasefire deal in Gaza back in January. So people saw this tweet as equating the two, Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners, caused a big uproar, and now they want to kick him out of the Knesset entirely. Truly an unprecedented move. The big thing here is that the opposition MKs in the Knesset committee that voted on this last week, they voted in favor to impeach him. And also opposition leader Yair Lapid said this past weekend that he would vote in favor of impeaching Ayman Odeh when it came to the plenum,
Next week.
the full plenum.
Next week.
Next
On
week.
Monday, yeah.
So, I personally think this is a disgrace. And by the way, just bad politics for the opposition because they don't want all of the Arab MKs to be disqualified because that will tilt the entire political map in Netanyahu and the right wing's favor. The opposition, as the opposition here does, thinks about things maybe in very short-term terms. But what do you think about this whole saga?
Well, first of all, I agree that it's a disgrace. I think it's for different reasons. I think it's a disgrace because this whole procedure that is used against Ayman Odeh is a procedure that was legislated in 2016. And it says that basically a majority of 90 MKs can decide to kick out another MK. I think to begin with, the process of MKs deciding who or isn't inside the Knesset is absurd. The voters need to decide who is inside and outside the Knesset. And when it was legislated, the opposition adamantly voted against it. I mean, including Yair Lapid, who is now intending to vote in favor of kicking out Ayman Odeh. At the time, I just covered it at the time, and I remember at the time that they were the ones that were warning that this is a dangerous process that will lead to persecution of minorities and of Arab MKs. And one of the reasons I'm also against it is because I think that, today the Arab MKs are a minority, and tomorrow, I mean, in my worst nightmare, I can envision a situation in which seculars are a minority or women are a minority in the Knesset. And this can be used in various in ways that scare me very much. And seeing, again, this is basically a gig by one of the Likud members who, Ayman Odeh is one of the most popular figures, the Likud members, to lash out at. And this whole thing started, as a primary gig of one of the Likud MKs. And the fact that, and it turned into, a big coalition celebration over Ayman Odeh. And the fact that the opposition is cooperating with this coalition, that in any other instances they are, fighting against them just on this issue, I think is a disgrace. I do think, or at least there is a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that the proposition does not pass
Okay.
in the plenum. I mean, even if Lapid will vote in favor, most or not most or a large portion of his party will not
Vote in
arrive,
favor.
will just not attend. And
Okay.
a large portion of Benny Gantz's party is not going to attend, and the Labor Party is not going to attend. So I think that just like the previous time, by the way, that the coalition tried to expel an MK, was Ofer Kasif last year, also from Hadash-Tal. They failed to achieve the required number of votes, which is 90, and they only had 86. So I predict or carefully predict that it's going to fall in the same way without, being approved in the plenum and then reaching court. Another thing that should be mentioned is that Ayman Odeh is not even running in the next election. So the whole thing,
that's the thing. He's already resigned effectively.
So the whole
like,
thing is just about, it really is just about, making a show. And eventually, because the whole process, by the way, it was done in a very non-professional way. They didn't really gather all of Ayman Odeh's really, history of statements. If they wanted to, they could have found many more statements, but they only brought in to the committee, that one tweet. And the law is very clear. You need to have like a mass amount of statements to prove that an MK supported terror. So in any case, this is going to be disqualified by the Supreme Court. But the opposition is, I think, making sure or cooperating with the Arab case to make sure that it doesn't reach that point, that it's a clash with the Supreme Court and that it just doesn't pass the plenum.
Okay, so that's good news. But yet I think the core point still holds. The opposition is always scared of its own shadow, scared of being tarred as weak on whatever. And in the next election and after the next election, they may need, if not active Arab support, then tacit Arab support to form a government.
One of the main keys for the anti-Netanyahu bloc to win the election is the voter turnout in the Arab sector. And that is a key to winning. And I agree that it's totally counter-effective to that goal. But there are some personal aspects to this. Ayman Odeh some of the people in the opposition have personal grudges towards Ayman Odeh. So I just hope that it doesn't pass the plenum next week.
Yeah, let's hope. On that note, Tal, thank you so much, as always, for your time and your analysis.
My pleasure.
You were very honest at the start, saying I don't know, which you never hear, not on podcasts, definitely not in Israeli media. But we appreciate the honesty and the authenticity. And until next time, hopefully we'll have a ceasefire in Gaza and hostages coming home, and then we can discuss what next.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Bye.
Take care. Talk to you soon. Bye. Okay, thanks again to Tal Shalev, as always. Also, special thanks to our producer, Jacob Gilman, and to all of you who support Israel Policy Forum's work. Do consider making a donation to Israel Policy Forum to keep being a credible source of analysis and ideas on issues such as these that we all care deeply about, including this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for listening.